Colonel Jackson. It is an honor to meet you. Your unit? I have read about it since I was a second lieutenant.
I am not sure I am worthy of such words, General.
She was just fixing her van until a general saw the tattoo and saluted. Colonel Evelyn Jackson thought she was invisible to history, her decorated service erased by decades of systematic cover-ups. Armed only with a faded tattoo and unshakable pride, she faced down military police who treated her like a threat. But when the highest-ranking general in the U.S. Army recognized that ink on her weathered arm, everything changed. What happened next exposed a conspiracy 50 years in the making and proved that some truths refused to stay buried. The Georgia sun beat down mercilessly on the asphalt outside Fort Benning's main gate, turning the air into a shimmering mirage of heat and humidity. Colonel Evelyn Jackson, retired, knelt beside her broken-down van with the patience of someone who'd learned to fix things with whatever was available. At 68, her movements were still precise, economical, the muscle memory of 4 decades in uniform never quite fading. Her weathered hands worked the wrench with practiced ease, dark skin, glistening with sweat, silver hair pulled back in the same tight bun she'd worn since basic training in 1975. The van was a piece of junk held together by determination and prayer, but it was hers. More importantly, it was her only way to reach the Vietnam Memorial Ceremony happening inside the base, a ceremony honoring units that, according to official records, never existed. Evelyn's jaw tightened as she remembered the phone call 3 weeks ago. "Ma'am, we have no record of a Shadow Legion unit," the young clerk had said, his voice polite but dismissive. "Perhaps you're thinking of a different designation, as if she could forget the unit that had defined her life, the brothers and sisters who'd bled and died in jungles whose names were still classified. As if the tattoo on her left forearm, a shadow of an eagle clutched in skeletal fingers, was just some random artwork instead of a badge of honor earned in hell. The sound of approaching boots made her look up. 2 military police officers stood over her, their faces stern beneath their caps, hands resting casually on their weapons. The younger one, barely old enough to shave, stepped forward with the swagger of someone drunk on authority. "Ma'am, you need to move along. This is a restricted area." Evelyn slowly stood, her 6-foot frame unfolding with quiet dignity. "I'm attending the memorial service. I have every right to be here, not without proper identification and authorization." The older MP said, his tone suggesting this conversation was already over. "Veterans need to register in advance." "I did register." Evelyn pulled out a crumpled form from her pocket. 3 weeks ago. Colonel Evelyn Jackson, Shadow Legion, 1975 to 1995. The MPs exchanged glances. The younger one actually smirked. "Lady, there's no such thing as Shadow Legion. You trying to run some kind of scam?" The words hit like a physical blow, but Evelyn had been fighting this battle for decades. Every VA appointment, every benefits claim, every attempt to honor her fallen comrades met with the same response. No records, no unit, no proof she'd ever served her country with distinction, but she had proof. It was etched in her skin, carved in her memory, and written in the scars that crisscrossed her body like a road map of classified operations. "Step away from the vehicle, ma'am." The younger MP ordered his hand, moving closer to his sidearm. "We need to search your van for contraband." Evelyn's eyes flashed with a fire that had once struck fear into enemy combatants across 3 continents. "Contraband, son. The only thing dangerous in that van is the truth." And apparently, that's what you're most afraid of. A small crowd had begun to gather, other veterans arriving for the ceremony-based personnel, heading to lunch, curious onlookers drawn by the commotion. Evelyn could feel their stares, could hear the whispered conversations. Crazy old woman, probably homeless. Why won't she just leave? The older MP, Sergeant Mills, according to his name tape, pulled out his radio. Base security, we have a situation at the main gate. Possible trespasser claiming false military credentials. False credentials. Evelyn's voice carried the authority of someone who'd once commanded respect from generals and presidents alike. She rolled up her left sleeve, revealing the intricate tattoo that covered her forearm. "You want to tell me this is false?" The shadow eagle seemed to move in the shifting light, its skeletal talons wrapped around a banner that read Umbra Legio, Latin for Shadow Legion. Beneath it, a series of small symbols that looked like random marks to the untrained eye, but told a story of covert operations spanning 2 decades. Sergeant Mills squinted at the tattoo, his expression shifting from dismissive to uncertain. "Ma'am, anyone can get ink. That doesn't prove." "Cambodia, 1978. Evelyn interrupted, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than shouting. "Operation Nightfall. Your precious Pentagon still has that classified, don't they, Laos? 1982. Operation Ghost Dance. Nicaragua, 1985. Operation Silent Thunder." With each operation name, the sergeant's face grew paler. These weren't random words. They were real missions, real code names that should have been buried so deep that only a handful of people in the world knew them. "How do you—" Mills began, but Evelyn wasn't finished. "I know because I was there, Sergeant. I was there when we pulled Senator Morrison's son out of that Cambodian prison camp. I was there when we stopped the arms shipment that would have destabilized half of Central America. I was there when good soldiers died for missions that officially never happened." The crowd had grown larger, and Evelyn could see recognition dawning on some faces, older veterans who remembered whispered stories, rumors of ghost units that operated in the shadows while regular forces got the glory in the history books. A black sedan pulled up to the gate, its government plates and tinted windows screaming official business. Evelyn's heart sank. More bureaucrats, more denials, more erasure of everything she and her unit had sacrificed. But when the rear door opened, the man who stepped out wore 4 stars on his shoulders and carried himself with the bearing of someone who'd earned every piece of metal on his chest. General Marcus Thompson, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, looked around the scene with sharp eyes that missed nothing. His gaze fell on Evelyn, traveled down to her exposed tattoo, and stopped. For a long moment, the most powerful military officer in America stared at the ink on an old woman's arm, his expression cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that looked like awe. Then, to the shock of everyone present, General Thompson came to attention and rendered a perfect salute. "Colonel Jackson," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. "It's an honor to finally meet you, ma'am. I've been reading about your unit for 30 years, wondering if any of you were still alive." The MPs looked like they'd been struck by lightning. The crowd murmured in amazement, and Evelyn Jackson, for the first time in decades, felt the weight of official recognition settle on her shoulders like the uniform she'd never stopped wearing in her heart. General Thompson's salute seemed to freeze time itself. The MPs stood slack-jawed, their authority evaporating like morning mist. The gathering crowd pressed closer, phones appearing to capture this unprecedented moment. Evelyn, despite decades of fighting for recognition, felt tears threaten to break through her iron composure. "At ease, General," she said softly, returning his salute with the precision of muscle memory. "Though I appreciate the gesture, I'm not sure my service record supports such honors anymore." Thompson lowered his hand, but maintained his respectful posture. "Colonel, your service record may have been buried, but it was never destroyed. Some of us have been guardians of that history, waiting for the right moment to bring it to light." He turned to the bewildered MPs. "Sergeant Mills, you and your partner will escort Colonel Jackson to my office immediately, and I suggest you treat her with the respect due a decorated war hero." "Sir, but our protocols," Mills began. "Your protocols just changed," Thompson said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "This woman has more combat decorations than most generals. She's earned the right to walk through any gate on any base in this country." As they walked toward the base, Thompson explained what Evelyn had never dared hope to hear. In 1995, when the Cold War officially ended, a small group of senior officers began compiling the real history of covert operations. Your unit, the Shadow Legion, was at the top of that list. "But the records," Evelyn started, "were classified beyond top secret and buried in archives that officially don't exist," Thompson finished. "The racial politics of the time made it easier to erase your accomplishments than to acknowledge them. An all-black special operations unit conducting successful missions while integrated units struggled. It didn't fit the narrative they wanted to tell. They passed through security checkpoints where guards snapped to attention upon seeing Thompson, their eyes widening when they noticed Evelyn walking beside him as an equal. Word was spreading through the base like wildfire. The mysterious woman at the gate wasn't a fraud or a troublemaker. She was a ghost from military history, suddenly made flesh. In Thompson's office, surrounded by the trappings of power and prestige, Evelyn finally allowed herself to believe this was real. The general pulled out a thick file marked with classification stamps that would have made most people's security clearances spontaneously combust. "Operation Nightfall," he said, opening to a page filled with her younger self's face and commendations written in language that made her sound like a superhero. "Successful extraction of high-value target from hostile territory. Zero casualties mission accomplished with minimal international incident." Page after page revealed the truth that had been hidden for decades. The Shadow Legion hadn't just existed, they'd been one of the most successful special operations units in military history. 12 major operations, 47 minor missions, a success rate that made Navy SEALs look like amateurs. "Why now?" Evelyn asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Why are you showing me this now?" Thompson leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking older than his years. "Because times are changing, Colonel. The military is finally ready to confront some uncomfortable truths about its past. And because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because we need heroes like you to help us train the next generation. I'm 68 years old, General. My fighting days are behind me. Your fighting days, maybe, but your teaching days could just be beginning." Over the next hour, Thompson outlined a proposal that took Evelyn's breath away. The Pentagon was establishing a new training program for Special Operations Forces, one that emphasized the psychological and strategic aspects of covert warfare. They wanted her to help design the curriculum, to share the lessons learned in jungles and deserts whose names were still classified. "There's more," Thompson said, pulling out another file. "We've located 7 other members of your unit who are still alive. They're scattered across the country, most of them fighting the same battles you've been fighting, trying to prove they served, trying to get the benefits they earned, trying to honor the memory of their fallen comrades." The names on the list hit Evelyn like physical blows. Marcus "Ghost" Williams, the sniper who could thread a needle at 800 yards. Sarah Phoenix Rodriguez, the demolitions expert who could make a bomb out of household cleaners. James "Whisper" Johnson, the communication specialist who spoke 7 languages and could hack any system. "They're all alive," she whispered, "all alive and all invited to tomorrow's ceremony. The real ceremony, Colonel, the one where the Shadow Legion finally gets the recognition it deserves." As they talked, Thompson's aide brought in a steady stream of visitors, reporters who'd been briefed on the story, historians eager to fill in gaps in the official record, and most importantly, other veterans who'd heard whispers of the Shadow Legion and wanted to meet the woman who'd become its living symbol. By evening, Evelyn Jackson was no longer an invisible veteran fighting for recognition. She was the center of a story that would reshape how America understood its military history, and the beginning of a reckoning that was 50 years overdue. The euphoria of recognition lasted exactly 18 hours. Evelyn woke in the base guest quarters to find General Thompson pacing outside her door, his face grim with the kind of expression that preceded bad news. "Colonel, we have a problem," he said without preamble. "Someone leaked the story to the press before we were ready. The Pentagon is in full damage control mode, and there are forces trying to shut this down before it goes any further." The morning news was brutal. Conservative pundits questioned the timing, suggesting the Shadow Legion story was manufactured to support woke military policies. Liberal commentators accused the Pentagon of a decades-long cover-up motivated by racism. Social media exploded with conspiracy theories, death threats, and demands for investigations. But the worst blow came from an unexpected source, Colonel William Hartwell, retired former commanding officer of the 75th Ranger Regiment. In a live television interview, he systematically dismantled Evelyn's credibility with the precision of a military prosecutor. "I served in Vietnam during the same period," Hartwell said, his silver hair and chest full of ribbons lending weight to his words. "I knew every special operations unit in theater. There was no Shadow Legion. This woman is either delusional or running an elaborate fraud." The interviewer pressed him, but General Thompson confirmed her service record. "General Thompson is a good soldier, but he's been misled by fabricated documents. The real tragedy here is that legitimate veterans are being dishonored by this fantasy." Evelyn watched the interview in Thompson's office, feeling decades of progress crumble in real time. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, relatives she hadn't spoken to in years, and veterans organizations demanding explanations. "He's lying," she said quietly. "Hartwell knows exactly who we were. His unit provided cover for 3 of our operations." Thompson nodded grimly. "I know, but he's not the only one. We're getting pushback from multiple sources, people who were there, who know the truth but are choosing to deny it." The reason became clear when Thompson's aide brought in a classified briefing that made Evelyn's blood run cold. The Shadow Legion hadn't just been erased from history. They'd been actively discredited by a network of officers who'd built their careers on taking credit for the unit's accomplishments. Operation Nightfall, the mission that had made Evelyn's reputation officially credited to Hartwell's Rangers. Operation Ghost Dance, a CIA operation with no military involvement. Operation Silent Thunder never happened at all according to the official record. They didn't just bury us, Evelyn realized. They stole our victories and gave them to white units. The conspiracy ran deeper than simple racism. Several of the officers now denying the Shadow Legion's existence had received promotions, decorations, and lucrative post-retirement positions based on missions they'd never actually conducted. Admitting the truth would destroy careers, invalidate awards, and potentially result in criminal charges for fraud. By noon, the Pentagon had issued a statement distancing itself from Thompson's earlier comments. General Thompson spoke prematurely about ongoing historical research. The Department of Defense cannot confirm the existence of any unit designated as Shadow Legion. Thompson was summoned to an emergency meeting with the Secretary of Defense. When he returned, his face was ashen. "They're transferring me to a desk job at the Pentagon, effective immediately, and they're canceling tomorrow's ceremony." "What about the other survivors?" Evelyn asked. "3 of them have already been contacted by military investigators. They're being told that any claims about Shadow Legion service could result in charges of stolen valor. The others," Thompson shrugged helplessly, "they're scared, Colonel. 50 years of being ignored, and now they're being threatened with prosecution." That evening, alone in her guest quarters, Evelyn stared at her tattoo in the bathroom mirror. The Shadow Eagle seemed to mock her, a permanent reminder of service that the world refused to acknowledge. She thought about the easy path accepting the Pentagon's offer of a quiet retirement with full benefits in exchange for her silence. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she hadn't seen in 15 years, Marcus Williams, her old teammate, calling from Detroit. "Evie." His voice was older, rougher, but unmistakably ghost. "I saw the news. They're trying to destroy us again, aren't they?" "Yeah, Marcus, they are." "Well, hell, guess it's time for one last mission." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking 7 old soldiers with nothing left to lose might be exactly what this country needs right now. You still got that evidence we buried in '95? Evelyn smiled for the first time in 24 hours. Every last piece of it. "Then let's remind them why they called us the Shadow Legion." Within 48 hours, the surviving members of Shadow Legion began converging on Atlanta like ghosts materializing from the mist. They came quietly, using skills honed in decades of covert operations, avoiding the media circus that had erupted around Evelyn's story. Marcus "Ghost" Williams arrived first, his 70-year-old frame still carrying the lean muscle of a professional soldier. Sarah "Phoenix" Rodriguez flew in from New Mexico, her engineer's mind already calculating angles of attack. James "Whisper" Johnson drove down from D.C., where he'd spent 30 years as a government translator, his security clearance intact and his memory perfect. They met in a rented warehouse on the outskirts of Atlanta, the same kind of anonymous space they'd used for mission planning half a century ago. The reunion was emotional, but brief. These were people who'd learned to compartmentalize feelings in favor of objectives. "Show us what you've got, Evie," Marcus said, settling into a folding chair with the patience of someone who'd spent weeks in jungle hides. Evelyn opened a waterproof case she'd kept hidden for 28 years. Inside were photographs, documents, and physical evidence from their operations insurance she'd gathered in case this day ever came. Mission reports in her own handwriting, photos of the team in the field, medals and commendations that had been issued but never officially recorded. "Jesus," Sarah whispered, examining a photo of herself defusing a bomb in Cambodia. "I thought all of this was destroyed." "Most of it was," Evelyn replied, "but I kept copies. Call it paranoia or preparation. Either way, we've got proof." James pulled out a laptop and began scanning documents with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades handling classified material. "This is good, but it's not enough. We need corroboration, official sources, people willing to go on record." "I might have something," said a voice from the warehouse entrance. They spun as one hand's moving to weapons that weren't there before recognizing General Thompson walking toward them with his hands visible and empty. "General," Evelyn said carefully, "thought you were persona non grata." "I am, which is why I'm here unofficially with information that officially doesn't exist." Thompson set a briefcase on the table. "Before they buried me in Pentagon paperwork, I made some copies of my own." The briefcase contained the smoking gun they needed, communications between senior officers detailing the systematic erasure of Shadow Legion records, memos discussing how to redistribute their accomplishments to more appropriate units, budget documents showing payments to officers who agreed to keep quiet about operations they'd never actually conducted. "This is conspiracy," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "This is treason." "This is 50 years of institutional racism and cover-ups," Thompson corrected, "and it goes all the way to the top." They spent the next 6 hours planning their counterattack with the same methodical precision they'd once used to plan military operations. The objective was simple: force the truth into the open in a way that couldn't be denied, buried, or explained away. Sarah, whose post-military career in cybersecurity had kept her skills sharp, would handle the digital warfare. James would coordinate with sympathetic journalists and historians. Marcus would reach out to other veterans who might have witnessed Shadow Legion operations. Evelyn would be the public face, the living symbol of everything they were fighting for. "We go public in 72 hours, Evelyn decided. Simultaneous press conferences in 5 cities, document dumps to major news outlets, and a full briefing to Congress. They want to bury us. Let's see them try to bury the truth when it's everywhere at once. The next 3 days were a blur of covert activity. Sarah infiltrated Pentagon databases not to steal classified information, but to document the systematic alteration of historical records. James contacted reporters who'd been investigating military cover-ups for years, providing them with leads and sources. Marcus reached out through veterans networks, finding witnesses who'd been silenced by threats and intimidation. The breakthrough came when James discovered that Colonel Hartwell, the man who'd publicly denied their existence, had received a Silver Star for Operation Nightfall, the same mission where Evelyn had actually led the rescue operation. The citation was detailed enough to prove that Hartwell had been nowhere near the action, but had somehow received credit for its success. "Got him," James said, printing out the documents. "This is fraud, plain and simple. Military decorations obtained under false pretenses." On the morning of their planned revelation, Evelyn stood in front of a mirror in her hotel room, adjusting the dress uniform she hadn't worn in 28 years. The ribbons and medals told a story of service that officially didn't exist, but she wore them with pride anyway. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Pentagon systems are locked down tight, but I got everything we need. They know something's coming." Marcus called from the Veterans Center, where he was holding his press conference. 30 witnesses confirmed, 3 generals, 2 senators, and a CIA director who's willing to testify. They can't deny all of us. At exactly 10 a.m. Eastern, the Shadow Legion launched their final operation. Press conferences in Atlanta, Detroit, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and New York simultaneously revealed the truth that had been buried for half a century. Documents flooded social media. Witnesses came forward. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and devastating. Evelyn stood at the podium in Atlanta, looking out at a room full of reporters' cameras and curious onlookers. Behind her, a screen displayed photos of her unit in action, young soldiers who'd risked everything for a country that had refused to acknowledge their sacrifice. "My name is Colonel Evelyn Jackson." She began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never stopped being a soldier. "For 50 years, my unit and I have been erased from history. Today, we're writing ourselves back in." The questions came fast and furious, but Evelyn was ready for all of them. She had the documents, the witnesses, and most importantly, the unshakable truth of someone who'd lived every moment of the story she was telling. By evening, the Shadow Legion was trending worldwide, and the Pentagon was scrambling to respond to a crisis that threatened to expose decades of institutional corruption. 3 months later, Evelyn Jackson stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, surrounded by the surviving members of Shadow Legion and the families of those who hadn't lived to see this day. President Martinez held a folder containing posthumous Medal of Honor recommendations, the highest military decoration finally being awarded to soldiers who'd earned it decades ago. The Shadow Legion conducted 12 major operations and 47 classified missions between 1975 and 1995. The president announced to the assembled crowd and television cameras, their success rate was unprecedented, their sacrifice immeasurable, and their erasure from history was a grave injustice that we correct today. The ceremony was everything Evelyn had dreamed of and more. Each surviving member received the recognition they'd been denied. Their service records officially restored, their benefits backdated to when they should have begun. More importantly, the truth was now part of the permanent record, impossible to deny or bury again. Colonel Hartwell and 6 other officers faced courts-martial for stolen valor and fraud. The Pentagon announced a comprehensive review of military records to identify other units that might have been systematically erased. A scholarship fund was established in honor of Shadow Legion members who died in service to their country. But for Evelyn, the most meaningful moment came after the ceremony when a young black woman in Army fatigues approached her with tears in her eyes. "Ma'am," the soldier said, "I'm Lieutenant Sarah Jackson, no relation, but I chose my name after reading about you. I'm graduating from Ranger School next month, and I wanted to thank you for proving that people like us belong in special operations." Evelyn looked at this young woman, confident, capable, unashamed of her strength, and saw the future that her generation had fought to make possible. "You don't need to thank me, Lieutenant. You just need to be excellent. That's the best honor you can give us." As the crowd dispersed and the cameras stopped rolling, Evelyn found herself standing alone with her tattoo exposed to the afternoon sun. The Shadow Eagle no longer felt like a burden or a secret shame. It was what it had always been, a badge of honor, a symbol of service, and proof that some truths are too powerful to stay buried forever. The Shadow Legion had completed their final mission. They'd fought their way back into history, and this time, no one could erase them